Hello and welcome to this episode of a Clean Bill of Wealth podcast. I'm your host, Galen Nuttall, and I have a quick question before we hop on over to the episode. Did you know that many physicians are overpaying taxes due to not leveraging their corporation effectively? I've seen cases where a physician is on track to lose out on millions of dollars in retirement because they're not using their corporation effectively. And if you are unsure if you are making the most of the unique entity that is the professional corporation, creating a plan with me and my team of corporate planning experts might be a good move. If you're interested in a plan that shows you how to make the most of your corporation, save on taxes, secure your legacy, and create a thriving retirement, we can create a personalized, powerful plan for you for a flat fee with no hidden commissions, and there is no obligation for you to buy any products from us. If you want to know more, head on over to galenhelpsdocs.com. That's Galen helpsdocs.com. Read up on what it covers and click on the book a call button to book a free call to explore whether a custom flat fee plan is a good fit for you. And now on with the show. All right, so welcome everyone to this episode of Clean Bill of Wealth podcast. I am joined with Dr. Mark Soth. First off, before I go to your bio, thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
No, absolutely. I can't. This is going to be an awesome conversation. I'm looking forward to it. So if anyone doesn't know, Dr. Mark Soth is a mid-career academic ICU doctor. And in addition to full-time clinical medicine, he is well recognized as an educator and physician leader. Through his Loonie Doctor blog and frequently speaking to groups of resident and practicing physicians, he has been helping Canadian physicians and other high-income professionals to not get hosed nor be hosers, with their time and money since 2017. Awesome. So yeah, and so I mean, a lot to talk about, obviously, but first off, we met recently, actually in person. I have not met many of my podcast guests in person, but we were at the
it was great to actually see humans.
Yeah, I actually saw real humans in the real live spot. And so it was part of the Physician Empowerment Conference. I was there as you were fielding some questions from like the table as different people were talking about different concepts. So definitely wanted to have an opportunity to sit down and talk afterwards. So I think one thing is maybe to give people a background of like, you have a blog around finance. You've got a website which has tons of resources on it around finance. Like, what got you started down this road of really diving into the idea of finances and high income professionals and physicians?
Well, I think the good thing to know is that it's not something I've done for years and years and years. It's something I kind of picked up, after I'd been in practice for about 10 years and realized this is actually important and I should help other people with it. I mean, prior to that, I had a passing interest in that. My parents taught me how to budget, and I went away to school with a budget and had to make my way through, undergrad and medical school, trying to live in as little money as possible. And I was taught, from the beginning, I got the wealthy barber from my dad when I was a teenager, and that as soon as I started earning income, I had to start putting money automatically into my RRSP and start saving for my retirement. So I did all of those things, and I had a financial advisor, who I would meet with once in a while, and they'd say a bunch of stuff about what they're putting me in and how it was going to work, and that was pretty much what I did, and didn't pay a lot more attention to it than that. And my first few years of practice, really, I spent all my time practicing medicine. We had small children at home. I spent a lot of time trying to build up the services in our hospital. I do intensive care, and at the time we had we had the ICU itself, and then a bunch of other services that were functioning in isolation. So I worked on trying to bring those together into a coordinated system. So all of that is what occupied my time, and I figured that, if I worked hard, I'm in a well-paying field with medicine. If I work hard, then the money parts just kind of will take care of themselves. And I didn't pay a lot of attention to it. But as I started to have some money, I started to dabble with some investing because I figured that's what you do. But I was honestly not very organized. I made all the mistakes you think you could make. I've made them. I mean, the only blessing is that it was not with a lot of money. It was a small amount of money, although it felt like a lot at the time. And that's where I was coming from. But and I think a lot of physicians are in the same boat where they figure if they work hard, practice medicine, which is what they love, that the money will take care of itself. But I mean, something started to change for me around somewhere, I can't peg it exactly, somewhere around 2015, over a short period of time, our tax bracket rose from about 48% to 54% over a few years. And, that was also accompanied with the government saying how we were overpaid and we need to pay our fair share and we weren't doing enough. And then they started giving fee clawbacks in the 3 to 5% a year range. So, the top bracket was then really, closer to 60%. And I work in an academic center where we have to pay a tax to the university on top of our overhead to cover university expenses. So all this was going on where I was, starting to more and more of the income I was earning was going to pay for other things with taxes and tithes and clawbacks. And at the same time, I was being told I wasn't doing enough. So that really, I felt honestly kind of betrayed, and I was really upset because here I felt, we're working so hard, and not only me, but my family sacrificed a lot for the work that we're doing. I mean, you can't have one person working huge hours and off hours without that impacting your entire family. So here we're doing this, and at the same time, the financial piece was brought to the forefront by all of that. So that's when I decided to, what am I doing? This is crazy. So I just started to pay attention to, well, how much should I work? And, if I'm working more but not earning as much with that extra work, why am I doing that? Well, how much do I need to work? And how can I spend less time doing that and do enough that, I feel that I'm contributing and it's valuable, but not sacrifice everything for it and balance that with the rest of our lives. So that's when I started to pay attention to personal finance. And the more I learned about it, the more I realized how important it was, because it's one of those things that if we, as physicians, take control of it, then we can use that as a tool to guide our career in good directions and our family lives in good directions. Whereas if we don't, it's very easy to be kind of blown whichever way the wind blows, and you don't realize that you've got a problem until you're trapped in something, and you're trapped and you can't get out. And those are the kind of things that really lead people to be burnt out, is when you get into those bad positions and you have no way of correcting course that you can see. Whereas if you have a good understanding of where you sit and you're actually in a good position, you actually have a lot of power to change how that works. So that's really when I started to pay attention to it. And as I was learning all of these things, I figured, well, if I'm learning it, I might as well start writing about it and teaching other physicians about it, because it is a major gap in what we do. And it's something that we can all benefit from. So that's how I got involved with doing this.
Yeah. And I mean, definitely you're giving a lot of information there in the background. I mean, what I'm hearing is around like kind of feeling squeezed from different directions of like working harder, but not seeing the reward on the financial side, and different things from the government impacting the way you got paid. And then going from a bit of an automated, I'm going to do what I'm going to do, make the money doing what I love, and it's all going to turn out okay, to then being a bit more active in that process. And so, and you mentioned taking control, or like being more active. Like, so what do you think that looks like for and I mean, I completely agree with what you're saying. Like a lot of physicians I meet, they're in that phase of, I'm going to keep working, I'm going to keep making good money. But like you said, if they're not on top of it, they're just going to go whichever way the wind blows. So like, what does it look like, do you think, from going from not really being aware of what's going on to having some awareness or some insight into what's going on financially for like the average, incorporated physician? Like, what do you think that looks like, that switch over?
Well, I think it comes down to, your attitude toward time and money changes a bit when you understand that, when you're exchanging your time, your life force and effort for money. And well, what is that doing in return? And there's, one of the biggest things that I start teaching about at the beginning is we're changing our human capital, which is our ability to work and put in effort to make financial capital. But we have to use that financial capital to then recharge what we're doing. And so kind of when you understand how that works, you can start to make more educated, deliberate decisions. Am I going to take a $10,000 vacation for 1 week when I know that means I'm going to have to work, 3 weeks or 4 weeks or 5 weeks or more to pay for that vacation? Is that, and everything we have to pay for is an after-tax dollar. So it's even more than that. So when you understand that exchange, you start to make more deliberate decisions around it. And that's the one piece, is you start to make spending decisions based on what you think is what's important to you, and rather than wanting just stuff that's around you, because we're constantly bombarded with stuff around us.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the challenges we have as physicians, is we're surrounded by other high income professionals as well a lot of our lives. So we get a bit of a skewed view of what that may be like. So I think that's the one thing that changes, is spending not just your money, but also spending your time. Am I going to spend more time on this area of work? Or am I going to spend more time in this area of my life? Or am I going to spend more time in this part of my work that I enjoy, but doesn't pay as much, but it gives me a lot more enjoyment, and I could do this longer than if I grind away at something that pays more. So you start to make more educated trade-offs rather than just following whatever's happening.
Yeah, I mean, I really like that idea. That definitely, that concept of human capital and financial capital is I saw that one fairly early on in my career as a financial advisor. I don't think I got it the first time I saw it, but the second time I got it, it was very impactful. Of the finite number of years that someone will be able to work, whether they think they're going to work forever or not. It's finite, and it's like, and at some point in time, that is going to drop. Either from the way of not being able to keep up with the same level of work, or simply like having less years ahead of you. And
or even in medicine, the work can change too, right? So the way that you practice now, there may be some radical change to how you practice that's brought onto you externally, and then how do you adapt to that? And we may think we're going to work to a certain period of time, but half of people retire before they planned to, and it's not because they wanted to, it's because something happened, a health issue with themselves or a family member, or something changes with their job. And if you're left scrambling at that point, then you actually are more trapped. You don't have the same freedom. And you ask, what does it look like for someone who has financial control as a physician? The other thing I noticed with physicians that have more financial control is they actually start to do more other things with their practice. So they may not just do the regular 9-to-5 grind through the usual stuff all the time, but there may be an area that they're interested in. They can take the risk of giving up some of their other paying work to concentrate on developing a new area, which usually is an upfront cost of time and money to take on something new. But they're able to do that because they're in a good financial position. And that could be something clinical that they do differently, or they could take on a leadership position where they can actually change how practice works and make the quality of their work life and the quality of what they're doing for their patients better. But a lot of that stuff that you do in those positions is not well paid. So you're able to do that if you're otherwise in a good financial position. So you have a lot more freedom to do those things when your financial health is in shape.
Yeah, like a bit more, sounds like more peace of mind and freedom around making some decisions and not feeling quite as trapped around, I have to do it this way because this is the only way I know, or this is the only way I know to make money. So sort of, and it sounds like exercising some creativity around the way the practice is run when they don't have that crunch necessarily. Yeah, very cool. And then one of the things that you wrote to me in an email that I found pretty interesting was you talked about delegation versus abdication of like financial, like knowing what's going on with your finances. We talked a bit about advisors, and this came up also as there was a session at the conference where the speaker was going into, sort of how to create a portfolio, and someone raised their hand and said, "Are we talking registered or non-registered?" And I thought that was like a really good question, because it's like there's so many nuances to what people can be doing, like with their corporation, inside of their corporation, outside of their corporation. So we got to talking a little bit about where advisors fit in. So where do you think an advisor fits in properly into the life of a physician when it comes to figuring out their finances?
Yeah, well, I think the reality is most physicians have a financial advisor more so than don't. And I do a lot of I advocate for a lot of do-it-yourself investing and taking on parts of it yourself as well. But I have an advisor as well, and I think there are ways that an advisor can help you. But the only way you're really going to get good value for the money is if you understand enough to be able to work with the advisor and delegate tasks to them and use them to their fullest. And then also to understand, how much you're paying for that to make sure that it's value for what you're doing. And there's a number of ways that an advisor can help you. I think one of the biggest ways that they can help you is as an external person looking on your finances, right? So even if you know a lot, having someone else look at it, and with my own financial advisor, one of the ways that they help me is that they help me to realize I could actually probably either work less or spend a bit more because I was well on track to where my plans were. Whereas normally I would just probably not do that, just being the way that I am. So it actually kind of was a bit useful to have that external perspective. And, that's one of the uses of advisors to help you to set goals and to work towards those goals. And when they try to, quantify the benefits of advisors, people that have goals and plans do tend to save and invest more than people that have no goal or plan because they're not really working towards something. So if an advisor is helpful for you to do that, that's one of the ways that an advisor is helpful to you. And another way they can help you is, people think about financial planning, they think about different pieces of it. Most people think about the investing piece, but the investing piece is really only one small aspect of it. So having someone who's able to help you with all the different pieces of like insurance, wills, estate planning, tax goals, tax planning, investment goals, and put that together, it can be helpful. I mean, you can learn about those things yourselves, but you have to make sure that you're being organized in how you do that. And this is with the investing piece too. I mean, you can learn how to do that yourself in a very simple way. And there's a lot of evidence to suggest that doing actually with investing simpler is often better. So you can often do some of that investing piece yourself in a simple to follow way. But even with that, an advisor may be helpful in the sense that there's someone between you and the sell button, because we can have a plan and it all objectively makes sense. However, we're all emotional beings, and if we are affected by our emotions and make behaviorally based mistakes, the most common one being, when markets go down, you think the world's going to end and everything in the media is telling you that, and you want to sell everything to feel safer, which is what the emotions tell you to do, which is the wrong thing to do. So having someone else besides you there is useful for that.
Yeah.
But I think the important things to know, though, is that that sort of advisor role and the investing role, they don't always have to be the same person. You can get that advice and implement the plan yourself. You just have to be able to implement it. And so that's, one of the ways that fees can be different is have an advisor and investing part separate from one another. And even if you decide to use someone to do all of it as the advisor, they can only work with what you give them. So if you don't, and they only meet with you for a short period of time, and no one's going to know the nuances of your financial goals and your financial life as well as you are. That's why having an understanding of what how your basics finances work, what your goals are, and how the product, people are going to try to sell you products. Some of them may be beneficial, some of them may not. There's alternatives. If you come into the table knowing some of that, you can have a much more educated and productive type of discussion than if you just abdict all of that to give it to someone. They can figure it out. Well, they may be thinking one thing, you may be thinking something else, but you've gone and just given that all to them without any real interaction over it. Whereas if you're knowledgeable and are able to delegate that to them, but still know enough about it to be in control, that's a different situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, what I'm hearing a lot of is like around the value of the advice that's being given. And I think that that's one of the things that definitely, that was one of the discussions as people were asking about the investing side is, how does the advisor get paid? One of the questions was, do they still get paid when the markets are down? Like, how does it work? And obviously there's different ways of advisors being paid, but certainly what you said around, having a layer of protection between you and the sell button, that's obviously one element that is helpful of having someone there who's like, yeah, we've been through this many, many times before. Every market crash looks different from the sense of there's different causes and different reasons, but every one of them has recovered. And there's no reason to believe that there's going to one day be one that doesn't recover because they keep recovering. And I think that that's one of the things is I think that for a long time, either advisors thought they could predict, and that was their value proposition, was like to predict or to beat the market or something like that. And there's no evidence to suggest that. But exactly what you said around goals and goal setting and having those goals can help people be further ahead than if they weren't
Yeah.
working with an
Well,
advisor.
it's important, but it is important for us to be aware of that evidence because there will still be, a lot of advisors that will try to sell you complex products that are supposed to beat the market in some way. And, I'm sure they believe themselves, their studies have suggested they believe themselves that they actually will work, although the objective data shows that, it's exceedingly difficult to do. And
Mm-hmm.
performance tends to trail in even worse than random chance. So,
Mm-hmm.
but that's still out there and it's still very, very prominent because that's, there's the financial industry is going to drive things one way,
Sure.
which may not be the same way that we would want it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, and I guess the funny thing is, like, I mean, the advisors I spend time with and myself, and like, we know that our value proposition is not any sort of timing or beating the market. We do believe, and there is evidence to show that the things that we do will allow people to have more money in the future than if they hadn't worked with us. But it's
Mm-hmm.
more from a tax planning. Well, goal setting is one of the biggest ones. Then it's tax planning is a big part of it. How to invest inside of the corporation versus outside of the corporation, and then all the things around, just as you mentioned, like estate planning and making sure people have a will, making sure the corporation has a will. I mean, all different things, and it's
Yeah.
basically based on having created hundreds of financial plans for
Yeah, well,
incorporated professionals.
I think the key that you're pointing out there is that there's things you can control, like you
Mm-hmm.
can control fees, taxes, and whether you're covered with appropriate insurance and estate planning. You can't control what the market's going to return and when. And if you spend a lot of money trying to do better than that, you're
Mm-hmm.
you're not going to most likely. So
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly it. Like, control what we can control and manage what we can't control. We can't control the markets, but we can manage our behavior around the
but it's
markets.
it's counterintuitive for a lot of people. I mean, and this is part of I think what doctors struggle with is that
Mm,
we're used to it. If we're smarter and we work harder, then we do better, right? And we figure the same applies to finance, where if we're smarter and harder working, then we're going to do better at investing. But it's actually not the case, and it's hard for us intuitively to accept that. And that's part of how doctors and other I think most people get trapped into that. And the other thing that I think, doctors love a narrative. We love to have the story about how the different things in someone's life came together and created the problem that they've got, and what are the different things
mm,
we can do to try to help them. And it's the same thing with investing. You can have lots of narratives to support any investment thesis you make up, and it's easy for us to love those narratives, right? And we love to understand things, so we feel like we're understanding something by understanding the story behind it. You're not realizing that anything that we see has already been seen by everybody else in the world and baked into the price of whatever it is we're looking to buy. So it's accounted for, and they're in an efficient market already. And
mm-hmm.
it's hard for us to accept that because we're used to being able to be smart and hardworking and do better. So it's counterintuitive that doesn't work.
Yeah, and I love that you've put it that way, because I've recognized it, but I haven't necessarily been able to vocalize it the way that you just did. Where I'll meet a doctor who'll say things like, "Well, I really want someone that's going to come to the table with innovative things, and they're going to be on top of the markets, and they're going to work hard to do better." And I think it might have been you who someone kind of hinted at that in a question and answer period at the conference, and someone, I think it was you, might have said, like, you don't necessarily want someone who's going to try harder when it comes to investing, because there's no statistical evidence that trying harder actually gets you anywhere. And I actually met with someone recently who they did believe that their advisor had, like, their so this is last year, their investments weren't doing that great, even though overall last year was a good year in the markets. Their investments were not doing well. And I looked at their portfolio and I said, well, a big reason is because you have a third of your portfolio in one thing. So that one thing didn't do well, so your portfolio didn't do well. And they have another advisor who's managing things, and they said, well, yeah, I'm not happy with this. I'm going to see what I'm going to do about it. And I kind of left it because I don't want to push people. Like, if they want to work with me, they want to work with me. So a couple months later, I just called back. I said, how did things go? And I said, oh no, I called them up and I said they needed to work harder, and they turned things around, and now things are doing really well. And I was like, that's a perception. I didn't say this to them because I thought, well, I've
Yeah.
already talked about how that's not necessarily possible to suddenly have someone working harder and then see results. Obviously, they switch things around and they happen to put their money into something that went up. And I don't know how they're doing now because I haven't talked to them since January. But it is, and I think there's an element of like wanting to believe, right? Like that I can work harder or I can find someone who's going to pay more attention and they're going to have more results in the markets.
Yeah,
And I think,
well, yeah, it's confirmation bias. I mean,
yes,
we will look for evidence that backs up what we believe,
yeah,
and it's very easy to find it.
yeah, absolutely.
Makes us feel good.
Yeah, it makes you feel good, right? Like, oh, I called them, I told them to work harder, and then things went up 10% the following month. So obviously they did what I told them to do, and now I'm really happy with them. And yeah, and I think that one of the things that really helped me, because before I became an advisor, I grew up in the roaring 80s where there were lots of movies around stock markets, and like there was one I really loved about it was it was called Quicksilver with Kevin Bacon, and he was a stock market guru turned bike messenger, and of course that's what they all do, right? I saw this movie, and he'd basically stare at the numbers, and he'd be able to pick the stocks that were going to go up in that minute. He just made all this money, and I was like, oh, I want to grow up to do that. Like that looks, I'm a smart kid. I like math. I can figure this out. And then as I grew up, I thought it was still possible, and then I became an advisor, and it's like, yeah, no, there's no statistical evidence that anyone can do that consistently. But then I was like kind of at a loss, like what do we do? And the thing that also helped me really like stop believing in I'm going to figure out how things are going to go was from learning about quantitative analysis, like these very strong algorithms that are timing the market in microseconds. And it's like, is my brain ever going to be able to beat a quantitative analysis machine that's this huge?
That's right. I mean, there are those that can beat the market. They do exist. It's just that it's not going to be us.
Yeah. 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 No,
yeah, we don't have a and there's like Renaissance technologies, and and what they do is they have something that does consistently beat the market, but no one can access it. It's all closed because once you get into larger and larger amounts of money, it becomes impossible to take advantage of the inefficiencies anymore. So
right.
So there are certain things that can beat the market. It's just they're not accessible to us.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. So I mean, the moral of the story, I guess, is like we said, like focus on the things you can control, and the things that have statistically shown people to be more likely to reach their goals than not. And even what you said around knowing that you are on track for your goals, like that's one of the biggest things.
Yeah, I think that's another way that I think that we can get off track as physicians. We tend to be competitive people, so we're going to constantly compare ourselves to everyone else around us, and that financially is no different. And that's when I said that we spend a lot of time rubbing shoulders with other high income professionals and other allied health professionals. We all make decent income, so we see that, and there will always be someone who makes more money than you, and you'll always see someone's got the nice chariot in the parking garage. But what you don't see is the debt they may have. You don't see the lack of savings they may have. You don't see the stress or that they may be feeling trapped because they don't have a lot of financial. We don't see those things. We see the stuff, and it's easy for us to want to try to compete for that stuff as well. Whereas personal finance really needs to be a one-player game where you have your goals, what's important to you, and that's what drives your decision making, not trying to compare what you think you should have because someone else has. That may or may not be important to you when you actually think about it.
That's a really good point. Yeah, I mean, I've met physicians who were burning themselves out trying to keep up with the Joneses, so to speak. And I met a physician who basically was telling, like, they were burning themselves out. I mean, just working insane hours. And I asked them why they were doing that, and they said, well, because one of my colleagues says that he puts away X every year into savings. And I said, well, like, what's your goal? Like, what's his goal? Like, there's a reason he's putting that amount of money away, but is that even your goal? And so it was kind of interesting, like, just as you're saying, like, really they had fixated so much on trying to do what this other person was doing, because it's like, it's kind of sort of an easy thing to try, like to see, oh, someone's doing X, I should do X also, even if it's unattainable, or if, like, I mean, not even to mention, like, different specialties make different amounts of money. So I mean,
well, yeah, and even just in your decision making, like, I can give you an example from my personal life. Is when I started out, I went on a number of really expensive vacations. We'd go to a resort and, it cost us like 10 grand for a week to go to this resort, and we'd sit around the pool or go to the beach, and there would be people waiting on you or whatever, because that's what everybody else did. And I could tell you by day 2 or 3 of that, doesn't matter how nice the place was, we all just wanted to go home because we missed our dogs, and we liked to just wake up, have breakfast, not talk to anybody. And we didn't want to sit around a resort, we wanted to go do stuff, which if you go to any of those resorts costs an arm and a leg. So we ended up actually stopped doing that. We bought an RV and traveled, 8 to 9 weeks out of the year in the RV with our dogs and our kids because we could. And it was a fraction, it cost us less than going to those resorts, and we had a lot more fun doing it. But, it was something completely different than what those around us were doing. And it took a little bit of while. When we first started it, my wife was like, "I don't want to do it because I don't want to go stay in trailer parks," because this is the perception that we had. We're going to go and stay in, like from the trailer park boys, and all of our friends are going to make fun of us. But what ended up happening is we loved it, and we got a bigger RV because my wife loved it and wanted a bigger RV, and then we started RVing with some of our friends, and it changed a completely different direction of way we did things, and it was because we just broke from what was sort of expected around us and went with what was actually important to us.
Yeah, that's a really great tangible example of that. Like kind of doing what you think you're supposed to do. Like, this is the thing people do is they go to a resort where they don't have to lift a finger. And then it's like, yeah, after 3 days, you want to go home. It's not really worth it.
No.
And discovering what really works for you. So yeah, that's a really great tangible example of that. And so one question I wanted to ask is around, so I think it's great that you're like, okay, I'm going to learn about finance, and as long as I'm learning, I might as well share this with others. What do you think are like some of the bigger learnings or bigger things that you see doctors can take on that'll make a difference that you don't see them already doing? Or what are the biggest questions you get that you think are ones that all physicians would benefit from knowing?
Well, I think we've touched on a number of them, but I think the first thing you need to know is I think people actually need to stop and look and see how much are they making, how much are they spending, and what are they saving each year. When I meet with people, a lot of people actually don't know that, right? Or they have some idea, but when they actually look and actually see, they realize it's actually completely different than what they thought it was. So actually knowing where that is and then seeing whether that's going to get you where you want to be towards the age you're planning to retire. And the other thing that can happen is we try to delay everything to that retirement. But if we aim to try to have financial independence earlier in our careers than that, then it actually allows us to not just do it all and nothing. Because one of the mistakes I see some people do is they spend all of their time, all of their energy, everything in medicine. And then they say they do this and they're going to retire someday, and they love medicine, and then they retire and they don't. A lot of them actually end up coming back to work, or they don't enjoy their retirement as much because they haven't spent time over those years leading up to retirement building other interests, building the relationships with other people outside of medicine. So when they leave the hospital or their practice, they don't have those other outside of medicine interests and supports that are there. And those are the kind of things that are built up over years. It's not something that you flip a switch and it suddenly changes. So by planning your financial health over time, and so that you gradually gain some financial independence in advance and take on some of those other outside interests and relationships, and kind of stop, reflect, and course correct along the way to be balanced, and gradually change how you practice and how you live your life over time can lead to a more successful outcome at the end. So that's one of the areas where I think we kind of fall off track, and it's easy to do because medicine, the demand is infinite, and it's really rewarding. I mean, it's exciting, it's interesting. You get socially and financially rewarded for doing it. It's easy to let it consume your whole life if you're not careful. So you have to kind of balance it against everything else, and not delay that balance for later on in your life. Start to do it throughout your life.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like a doctor going into retirement, and then like they have no identity outside of medicine, or no interest outside, or minimal, I should say, interest or identity outside of medicine. Then it's like, now what do I do with myself? Like all the source of creativity, social interaction, everything was tied up in my career.
Yeah. And I think in terms of the financial piece specifically, I think with the physicians need to understand, what they're actually invested in, the different account types that they're using, and whether that's actually to their advantage or not, and what's in them. Is it what are the fees of the items that are, so they need to understand, what their advisor gets paid, what fees are embedded in the products that they use, and understand that that's going to have an impact on performance. A lot of people don't really even know that. So that'd be another very low hanging fruit of something to have some basic understanding about.
Yeah, absolutely. That was definitely one of the questions that came up at the conference, is like, well, how does my advisor get paid? And, really there's a myriad, not a myriad, but there's multiple different ways that advisors do get paid. And, myself, I understand them fairly well because I'm on the inside and I understand the different models, but I totally got that in the conference of like, oh, right. Like I understand this because I'm on the inside seeing all the different models, from if you're working with someone who works at a bank versus an independent advisor versus someone who has access to ETFs versus someone who doesn't versus a portfolio manager. Like there's a lot of different ways.
Yeah. Yes.
And a lot of people are completely unaware of what that might look like.
No, and we're used to working in a consultancy model with medicine, where we consult somebody and they're going to do their best for us no matter what. And that's the main driving outcome, is to do the best thing for the patient possible. And there's really not a lot of other competing interests there.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, for sure. Because certainly that's a whole other thing, is like, how do people get how is an advisor getting compensated by offering A versus B? Or just as you were talking, even on the insurance side, like we won't go into that, but that's a big hot button topic of how advisors get paid for different insurance products that may or may not be a good fit for people, and some things that are pushed more heavily than others. And even which licenses does your advisor hold? Like I find that it's very different to work. I've found the philosophy of someone who only has an investment license can be very different than someone who either understands both the investment insurance side or is actually licensed to work on both sides. Because and then on top of even if someone is interested in investing, do they have any mind for the tax side of things? Because I will oftentimes find people who are purely stockbrokers working with a registered account.
Yeah, well, I think
all sorts of tax.
Yeah. Well, that's where one of the areas where, when you're talking about delegating out your financial responsibility, it's really hard to find a financial advisor that does the tax planning well, and an accountant that knows enough about the investing to put those two pieces together. Like the accountant's going to take whatever you hand them and do the best they can with it, but they may not, know how to or suggest how your overall asset allocation can be efficiently used within your corp or your RSP or TFSA. That's more the investment advisor piece. The investment advisor piece may look at your asset allocation and optimizing it that way, but not deal with the tax consequences of that, or how to access, how that's going to impact you down the road when you go to access the money, which may have just as much impact as it did while you were building up the money.
Oh, yeah, that's a huge one I see consistently. When a lot of times I'll meet someone who has quite a bit of money saved up inside of their corporation, and it's not being invested in a tax efficient way. And all that person is oftentimes looking at is the rate of return. And I'm like, well, how much of that rate of return are you going to get to keep after you've paid all the taxes on it? Because it's two different things. And a lot of times people do think it's the accountant that knows these things. Whereas, typically the accountant, as you said, they're going to work with what they give you. I can't think of very many accountants at all that I've met that will proactively say, hey, by the way, have you talked to your advisor about tax efficient investing in a non-registered account?
Nope.
It does not happen.
No.
And so I have clients who are accountants. I have clients who are lawyers. Like, so sometimes that helps people understand. Like, I have incorporated accountants who work with me for their investing because it's not what they do. Just like I use an accountant for my taxes. I don't do my own taxes.
Yeah.
I give it to an accountant that knows what they're doing.
No, but we need to know. We're not going to be experts at either of them. As physicians, we've got other things that occupy our brain power, but we need to know enough basics about them that we can help to bridge that gap a little bit. At least know that it exists.
Yeah, and it's absolutely, because sometimes I'll bring an idea to the table that someone would say, "Oh, I assume my accountant's already thought of this," and I'll say they may or may not have asked them the question.
No.
The evidence is showing me they haven't, and it could be obviously the complete same thing if someone's talking to their accountant, thinking, "Oh, my advisor's already thought of this side of things," but unless
Yeah,
they've
no,
asked.
and generally they want to be helpful, but they have a certain way
Hmm.
of doing things, and if you ask them and bring it up, then I've had it happen where you bring it up and they causes them to think, and then you come up with a different plan than what you'd have done otherwise because it's a different way of doing things.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Like lots of rules of thumb in the different industries of tax and advice and or financial planning, investing, and even legal side of things. So certainly, a lot of times someone will be working under a certain level of rule of thumbs assumptions, and then it's kind
Hmm.
of like, oh, bring this to the table to kind of get them to think about: is there something here that's outside of the rule of thumb that you're used to, or a different approach?
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I've figured out, having spent a lot of time looking at all this, is when you start to talk about a high income professional is going to have a corporation, probably an RSP and a TFSA. The rule of thumbs don't work that well anymore
Hmm.
because there's enough variables in there, uh, mishmashing around that it can be difficult. But I would say the other part of that is the enemy of good is perfect, and you don't have to be perfect, right? If you
Yeah.
take care of the big pieces, which is spend spend within your means, save enough, invest it in a tax efficient, fee efficient way. That's 90% of the battle, and the other sort of trying to tax optimize everything perfectly is 10%, and you don't want to sacrifice that 90% because you're obsessed about the 10%. And the worst possible thing you can do is nothing because you're
Hmm.
trying to have a perfect plan, when if you can have a 90% perfect plan that's easy to implement and doesn't give you a headache, then go with that plan.
Absolutely. That is phenomenal advice. And I couldn't agree more. Yeah, like trying to get things perfect. A lot of people can get really stalled and really, like you said, those main things are going to get you 90% of the way there, and focus on those main things. And there's some fine tuning that can get you a bit more, but yeah, it's
Yeah,
sometimes
and
it's
the other
just
thing
not
to
worth
know
it.
with that too is
Hmm.
that just because you go down that 90% good path doesn't mean you can pick up that other 10% later.
Exactly.
And the biggest thing that you have to be aware of when you're saving and investing is that time is your biggest factor as to your outcome. And that's part of why Warren Buffett has been so successful. He's a great investor, but he's also been alive forever and had a very long time frame to have compounding returns with, right? So if you can get invested early and efficiently for a long period of time and then tweak it later on, that's much better than waiting and trying to do it later someday, because
Absolutely.
you don't get that time back.
Yeah, time is your best friend for sure. Yeah, I love that's a really good point about Warren Buffett. Like he's he's been doing this for like 70 years or something like that. So it's easier to look like you're really amazing at what you do in the markets when you've had 70 years of performance behind you, as long as you've
Yeah.
been doing something
Although
relatively
although
smart.
to perform well for 70 years is a pretty big feat too.
Yeah,
Not too
absolutely.
many of those out there.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Well, I love that. So, I mean, I think that's a really good point to start to wrap up on around that 90%. And perfect is the enemy of good in the sense that you can get a really great plan and pick up that final 10% as you go. So, yeah, I mean, thank you so much for being here on the podcast. I really appreciate the insight you have into, as a physician, of course, figuring all this out on your own, but then also being in conversation with other physicians that are going down the same path.
My pleasure. I was really appreciated coming here.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the best way for people to connect with you after the podcast is www.looniedoctor.ca. Anything else you want to add around that for people to know
Yeah,
what they'll
no, that
find when
that
they go there?
yeah, that's my website, and right now it's still kind of a chronological, somewhat organized of me learning things over the years. There's gaps there. I actually meant to go part time just before the pandemic hit and spend more time fixing it up, and then ICU obviously got very busy. But I'm now actually in the process of rebooting it. So I'm going to have a section that's for beginners, just to go, if you want to start here and learn to get some basic financial education. I've got a series that's going to be coming over the summer, or that's going to be kind of in one location on the website. And then I'm going to spend some time reorganizing and filling in the blanks on the rest, because there's a lot of material there from basic to really, really advanced. And I don't want people to get lost because of the advanced stuff when really most people need the basic. But it's also there if you want to learn more about it, because very few other people actually write about some of the more complex issues around incorporation and high income professionals. So there'll be hopefully something there for everyone. And I'm going to be in the process of reorganizing all that over the summer.
Very cool. Awesome. No, that sounds great. That whole range of basic to advanced, definitely. Like, as you said earlier, the rules of thumb stop working very well in these complex situations. Once you throw a corporation into the mix, one of the things I did do over the pandemic when I was trapped in the hospital is I made calculators that have automatic tax calculations in the background and simulate different performance incorporations and RSPs and TFSAs over time, and then try to make those tools make kind of asset location tax optimized type of portfolios and basically retirement drawdown plans, those kind of things. So a lot of that complex stuff I've tried to make a little more automatic with some of those calculators where you can input your income and how much you want to have to spend and your time frame and have it spit out some numbers to you. Very cool. Oh, that's very helpful. That's awesome because as you mentioned, like it's once you throw a corporation into the mix, things can get quite complex. So to have those tools is very helpful. Awesome. So everyone be sure to check out www.looniedoctor.ca to see what's there right now, and then also just keep going to see as you update things. So awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here.
Great. Thanks a lot. Have a great day.
You too. Thank you so much for having joined me on this episode of A Clean Bill of Wealth podcast. I truly appreciate you taking the time to do so. It really warms my heart to see the numbers of people listening to each episode go up, and it's just a lot of fun. Be sure to check back through past episodes to find insight on everything from more efficient charting practices to better sleep for physicians and much more. If you'd like to make sure you're leveraging your corporation effectively for taxes, retirement, legacy, and other financial matters important to physicians, please head on over to GalenHelpsDocs.com to check out the work that we do with fee-based planning. Our fee-based plans are powerful, customized to you, and there's no requirement to buy products from us and no hidden commissions. You get clear, unbiased recommendations based on our expertise helping hundreds of incorporated Canadians, just like you, create their ideal financial life and future. Again, it's GalenHelpsDocs.com. Click on the Book a Call button at the top for a quick and free conversation to find out whether fee-based planning makes sense for you. Thanks so much for joining me. Take care and see you at the next episode.